Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Afternoon Tea with ET podcast. In this week's third episode, we're going to delve into thought forms. So, hey, Autumn, great to see you again today for our third episode. How's everything going?
It's going good. I'm excited that we get to record another episode and it's a beautiful day here. We're finally starting to get warmer weather, which is very exciting. How are things going for you?
Yeah, definitely not the same on the warmer weather, but then that's the UK for you. It's like it's been a mixture of wind, rain, and more wind and more rain kind of this year in general, with the occasional like 5 minutes appearance from the sun. So yeah.
I'm sure that that when the sun does appear, the people in your country probably come out in droves just to stand in the sun. Does that happen?
It certainly does, yeah. And in line with this week's topic of thought forms, I think I need to be working on putting some thought forms out there to shift the weather patterns. That's my little bit of homework, I think.
Yeah. You never know. You might be able to manifest something.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So do you want to get going on? I know that we've both done some really interesting research and had some chats about this topic, which is why we decided to do it as a third episode, because
Yeah.
there's so much to it, and I think it's so relevant at this time.
Oh,
But
definitely.
go ahead with what you wanted to start with.
Sure. Well, I so we're kind of changing back and forth who is picking the topic at the moment, and I was the one who picked this one, and I didn't realize at the time when I had picked it just how dense it was. But I'm still excited about it. Researching it was fun, and yeah, I'm happy to jump into it if that's what you want to do. Anything exciting going on for you this week? Any cool contact experiences at all?
Well, they've definitely increased, I think, since we started doing this podcast.
Yeah, it seems to be the case for me too.
Yeah, I think sort of really taking action, it just goes to show, doesn't it, that taking action on your true passions just really resonates and builds the energy and brings out more of the true self sort of thing. And then if it's aligned with that sort of thing with ET contact, then you're going to start experiencing more high strangeness and more contact with our, wider families, so to speak.
It definitely seems to be the case. And I know, many channelers have said something along those lines that we're moving towards being more of ourselves, being more authentic, and that helps with contact. And every time I shed away another layer of some false aspect of myself, it just seemed to ramp up the contact experiences a lot.
Yeah.
This week was this week was a lot of dream contact. I didn't have a lot of memories of the dreams, but I would wake up having a vision of a particular ET in my mind, or just a sense that I had spent a good portion of the night like interacting with ETs. And so
Mm.
sadly no cool dream stories to tell, but it was definitely an interesting week in terms of my nighttime contact.
Yeah, I went for a walk in the woods yesterday and I didn't really pick up on it at the time, but later when I got back and I was kind of having a meditation, they kind of clearly showed me that I was basically I had some company, although I didn't realize it at the time. They showed me in my mind's eye like a white orb following me at a slight distance
Oh,
when
interesting.
as I was walking up the path. So that was quite interesting.
That is cool. I do find being out in nature, like orbs, is one of those more common ones. I have occasionally seen them like with my actual eyes, and especially one in particular that was very prominent and very obvious to not just me but three other people that were with me. Was we were doing witchcraft. We were doing magical practices in the woods at nighttime by a body of water. And then when we were finishing up and getting ready to go on the path, there was a just a blue orb just hanging
Wow,
out.
that's so
Complete,
cool.
very silent too, which, I like to specify that because some people will say, "Oh, that was ball lightning." But ball lightning is typically very loud and it moves around. And this orb was standing perfectly still and it was silent. So um that was a pretty cool experience. Orbs are fun.
So
Anyway.
is there always a sorry, I'm really
Oh
going
no,
off
no, go
topic
ahead.
here.
Go ahead.
Is there always a sound when you have ball lightning? Because when I was a kid in France, there was like something about the size of a football, which was about 20 meters away, and it was white and it was hovering just like about 5, 10 centimeters above the ground, but it was completely silent. And like quite a few saw it.
Yeah, from what I understand, and I haven't delved too deeply into the studies on it, I think that's generally like there's criteria for something to be ball lightning, and that's one of the things. They're kind of loud. It's like a
Mhm.
lot of electrical charge happening. I don't know what they sound like in particular, but I do hear that they are loud.
Right, right.
Yep. All right. So I think I'm ready here to jump into my notes. All right. So I tried a different thing this week. I wanted to write out a little bit more of what I was saying instead of just having points. So if it sounds like I'm reciting something, it's because I am. All right. So when I initially went to research on the concept of thought forms, I wanted to understand where the concept originated from, at least with the term thought form. I do understand that it's a similar concept to other concepts from around the world. But I wanted to understand where that phrase thought form had originated from. So it's what I wrote was basically it came from the Theosophical Society, and was first presented to the public through a book called Thought Forms. And it was written by Annie Besant and C.W. Leadbeater. That's an interesting last name. um, So let's see. I put a quote here from an article saying, kind of giving a gist of what they were trying to get at with the book. It says, the authors write that they, like many other theosophists, are convinced that thoughts are things, and the task of their book is to help the reader understand this. Um, so the next thing I wrote was, many spiritualists from the turn of the century were attempting to utilize scientific methods to explore, map, and prove the existence of paranormal phenomena, as well as explain the nature of spirit through objective terminology.
Mm.
This very much sums up the initial meaning of the concept of thought form. The authors painted a confined picture of what they believed were thought forms and set standards of how they thought they looked and functioned. So this is very much kind of how early spiritualists looked at spiritual phenomena, because this was, the turn of the century. Science as a way of looking at the world was really just starting to condense and be formed as an actual thing, as an academic thing. And so everybody was trying to approach things in a science-minded way. And there was this possibility embedded in science, which was to be able to prove the non-physical aspect of life. So instead of just relying through faith on religion, there was this possibility and potential to utilize science in a way to prove that spirit is real, that these non-physical experiences are real and um, uh, material to some degree. So that's kind of what I was trying to touch on with what I wrote there. And that influenced the way they talked about thought forms, the way that they wrote in this book about thought forms. Um, so, and I do want to say off the bat that I'm not a big supporter of the Theosophical Society or the spiritualist movement, just in the sense that I think, well, it's a double-edged sword. I do believe that the Theosophical Society and the other spiritualist movements help to kind of um, initially paved the way for the spiritual movements that we have now. It kind of, they channeled and brought in ideas that people hadn't thought of previously because we weren't trying to observe life in this way, at least speaking for Europe in particular.
Yeah,
So,
and things have evolved since those days, haven't they? Like
yes, yes.
that's
Because
the thing. So yeah.
yes, and that's the double-edged sword part, is that they brought in a lot of interesting ideas, but they were also heavily influenced by their culture at the time, which was
Hmm.
very much embedded in things like hierarchy and white supremacy, which is can be seen in portions of their work, but also I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, because I do believe that it's almost like information from non-physical places comes through humans, and it comes through whatever filters the humans have at the time.
Yep.
So I think there's a mix in their works, a mix of things that are um, I think resonant with the future we're heading towards and the understandings that we're heading towards as a collective. And I think there's also stuff in there that is, um, if you were to take it literally or if you were to believe it, it would pull people back. It would kind of take people back in time rather than helping to move them forward. So I just wanted to cover that before going further. um, so the next thing I wrote was, I personally feel that this information that they divined was only the tip of the iceberg when it came to understanding thought forms, as is the case for many theories that were created by theosophy and other spiritualist groups. The filter through which they were interpreting and expressing these non-physical ideas was a lot more restrictive and heavily influenced by the culture of the time, which is just another way of saying what I just said. Okay. So the next thing I wrote was, many interpretations of this theosophical idea have unfolded over the years. The general consensus is that thought forms are the energetic blueprint that precedes physical manifestation. So by proxy, physical manifestations are also thought forms, or they can be the higher dimensional form of a non-physical experience, such as joy, sadness, confusion, or feeling stuck. Some
Mm.
people believe that all thought forms exist and cannot be made or destroyed. Some, and then others believe that humans can create thought forms consciously or unconsciously. Either way, a foundational tenet of this idea is that all of creation, whether physical or non physical, is made up of mind or thought, and that all thoughts are created by and exist within consciousness. So I just wanted to give that like general foundational idea that that's kind of what we're talking about when we're talking about thought forms. I added a little side note here that this idea, this belief that life is made up of mind is very much a belief that's coincides with the age of Aquarius. And you see that with a lot of these spiritualist um people from the turn of the century who were kind of initially making the spiritualist movements. They talked a lot about the age of Aquarius, and that this kind of way of thinking was kind of bringing that in. Whereas with the age of Pisces, it was this um, experience with Jesus Christ and his death and resurrection that was an indicator that the age of Pisces had started.
Mm.
So now I'm going to share a little bit about my own thoughts and the things that I've kind of come to for these thoughts, the different ways that I've kind of come to these theories is just through my own um, reflections on them, my own meditations on the concept. I will admit that prior to this, I didn't really do a lot of studying related to thought forms. I had heard of other people in spiritual communities talking about the concept, and it's an interesting concept. So it's really easy to meditate on and think about, what could that mean? in what could that imply in terms of how that expresses itself in life. So yes, I spent time meditating on this, channeling stuff, and also I have in the past used like plant medicines as well. And I have an interesting story about that at the end of this little spiel I'm doing. Um, so the other thing I wrote was another side note, I guess. I would agree that you can see thought forms if you are clairvoyant, but sometimes the way that they appear can be outside of what you would expect. Seeing thought forms is not as important as understanding that they are there and that it is your choice as to whether or not you want to engage with them. So there's a big emphasis about what do thought forms look like, and there are people who actually channel thought forms and will make pictures like paintings and things like that, which is very interesting, but it's not uh, detrimental if you can't see them, and it's not essential um, in terms of working with them to see them or know what they look like.
Right.
Okay, so now we're getting into the list of my own thoughts, I guess here. So thought forms are infinite in their expression, so they cannot be defined as a whole. You could potentially categorize or map thought forms that are linked to Earth and the human experience, but the further you get outside of the human bubble, the harder that is. And so, yeah, I was just trying to convey that um, this idea that there any one particular thing is in this realm of like philosophical thought, it being absolutist about it doesn't make any sense because thought forms are
Absolutely.
creations. Right, right. Thought forms are creations of consciousness. Consciousness is infinite. And so they can show up in a variety of ways. And I've had different experiences, like, say, when I'm trying to break away from a certain thought pattern, where I've engaged with thought forms that seem like energy. I've engaged with thought forms that make themselves look like a person. I've engaged with thought forms that look more like an alien. At least in my mind, I'm talking about in a visionary sense, like if you're meditating and having visions of what you're interacting with.
You've
Um,
just brought something up really interesting for me, which is if you compare a human being, which, as many people talk about, is a combination of the soul, not of this earth, combined with the physical body consciousness, the earth consciousness, and of course the egoic consciousness. That, and then there you have your human being sort of multi-dimensionally sort of coming together. I would imagine that thought forms obviously don't have the same parts in the sense that they wouldn't have a soul incarnate into them, but they're more just sort of earth-based energies which have a degree of individuality in a sense, but of course are not sentient
yes,
in the way that we are.
I think there's different levels of expression of awareness
Yeah,
that can make it seem like some things are more sentient than others, especially from a physical perspective. But I think really the only difference with different kinds of thought forms is that, well, the only difference, but there's lots of differences, but I think the most observable difference of thought forms is that some thought forms only stay in the non-physical realms, and and some thought forms get manifested physically.
yeah,
So in the
and I
physical
guess
realm, we're
yeah,
all everything around us is forms of thought. Um, but so they have a higher dimensional aspect to them, but not everything gets physically manifested from the higher dimensions, if that makes
yeah,
sense.
yeah, it really does. And I guess also to add to that, it's how the observer interacts with the thought form that, in a sense, gives it a form of life, or what you know. So it's probably like with everything we experience, it's what happens when our consciousness interacts with this so-called perceived external thing, although one could argue that nothing is truly external, that everything is within our own consciousness as far as we perceive it.
Mhm.
So, but anyway, yeah, I
Yes.
digress.
Yes. No, it totally makes sense. And I think that's why having like visionary experiences with plants and things like that can be so interesting, because when you're just having a normal physical day to day, you your brain automatically categorizes things of importance, right? And so we have a tendency to look at a person in front of us and say, "Oh, that person has a soul, they're sentient." And the desks in front of us, and we look at that and be like, "Oh, that's an object that doesn't
Yeah,
have any life to it." But it then
it's it's all
you
consciousness.
right.
It's a different form of consciousness. I would say it's more awareness
Right.
that, and it just doesn't have the same degree of focus that we do.
Right.
You know.
Or different type of communication, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah.
I
Well,
could
yeah.
potentially communicate with my desk, but I guess that also that also brings in the element of relevance too. I think, you know, we can only focus on so much at once in this dimension. So we try to just focus on things that are relevant to us,
Hmm.
you know? And
Yeah,
maybe that's a part of people who have experiences like schizophrenia, you know, having
yeah.
less of that ability to filter out what's relevant and what's not. And so they're getting bombarded with, information and communication constantly.
I'm trying desperately to think of a joke about talking to a brick wall, but I just can't quite get one in time. So, well, let's move on from that.
Okay. All right. So my next little blurb here. Um, so I believe that thought forms are inherently neutral and that all potential thought forms already exist. It is through our limited human filter and collective soul agreements that we see some thought forms as good and some as bad. The ways in which we choose to engage with thought forms is a part of what brings us pleasant or unpleasant experiences. And I think as a intellectual and philosophical rule, you know, when you look at that at life from a detached place, I support what I just, said there. But I do think that, life is subjective. We all have very specific things we're trying to experience while we're here. And um and there are some experiences on earth that are really awful. And in order to recover from them, you need to engage with how awful those experiences can be and how wrong they are, essentially, on the human level, because we don't want to repeat those things, right? We want to move humanity in a direction where we're not hurting each other quite as much. So
Yeah,
I add that just because I want to acknowledge that, once again, relevance plays a role. If we're looking at from like a bird's eye perspective and a detached perspective of how the rules work for reality, I would say, you know, what I wrote is probably not an absolute truth, but it's touching on a truth for this reality. But I also want to say that that's not always relevant.
yeah.
Depending on what you're going through in your life, that kind of information is not always relevant.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So my next note says, humans can use thought forms to create thought landscapes, thought prisons, and thought structures. Religion is one of the most famous examples of a human thought structure. We take individual thought forms and vibrations, like building blocks, and combine them into a larger vibrational structure that has a significant impact on daily human life. So this is I think going into the concept of the creative element with thought forms and how humans can engage and interact with them and basically create belief systems and sorry, belief structures. And we can utilize those things to create experiences of reality, collective realities that we agree upon together. Um, and that can do things that are, well, we can perceive those experiences as good and adding to humanity. We can perceive those experiences as bad and taking things away. But ultimately, we are opting into different kinds of experiences and limitations so we can, I guess, learn things from
Yeah.
these interesting thought creations that we make. So this one is a fun concept. This one I ended up figuring this out because when I was going through the more difficult parts of my own healing experience, I realized that not all shadow work is emotional. Sometimes you have to figure out weird um, psychological blockages and contortions and wounds in your mind too. And one of the things that I found happens frequently, especially for people who've experienced gaslighting. So, where you're spending a lot of time with someone who invalidates your perception of reality, it can create what I like to call puzzle boxes, mental puzzle boxes, or, I guess thought prison could be another word, but that's a little bit more stark, right?
Mm.
Um, so what I wrote is puzzle boxes are expressions of trickster thought forms. They usually have some trick to them that loops you back around and keeps you staying inside of the box. So, to give an example, that would be something like one of the puzzle boxes that I had to remove myself from was asking, why is there evil? Why is there um, so much violence and negativity in existence? Um, and the trick about this question is that no answer will satisfy it. Evil and the experience of negativity just exists. That's it's just a part of existence. There's no answer to that question. So by focusing on the question keeps you stuck in a loop, going over and over again about a particular thought. And the only way to get out of the box when that with that particular thought puzzle is to just put the question down and
So
understand that it's a trick. It's not a relevant question for.
yeah, yeah, that to me, that points to the sort of, you know, it's it's a it's a part of human consciousness, and we would only ask these things and try to find answer if it's something that we're not comfortable with. We can't resonate or integrate within ourselves in a comfortable way. And yet, in order to sort of truly develop and evolve our consciousness, it's finding new relationships, new ways to look at these sorts of ideas, these sorts of experiences, and frame them in a different way that we can accept into our consciousness,
Mhm,
which obviously causes then a great deal of expansion because then you can adopt newer perspectives around much more compassion, that kind of thing.
mhm. Oh yeah. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to intellectually understand our engagement with negative vibrations
Mm.
and negative experiences and the worst of the worst out there. Um, but when and that has a lot to do with the heart. But when it comes to the way that the mind can get stuck on particular questions and wanting there to be like a logical answer to certain things, something that makes sense, something that will, um, how do I put it? Basically end the existence of something that's bothering you, such as
Yeah.
evil. Because like
Yeah.
that's the whole reason why I wanted to ask that question, was I wasn't happy that I had these experiences, and I wanted them to go away and have never existed, and I wanted to just live in a perfect universe of love. Um, and the thing is like existence just is, and it expresses itself as it does, and
Mm.
everything that can exist just exists.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there is no way to get an answer to that question that would ever be satisfying. So the question is not uh, I don't think it's I used the word relevant before, but I don't think that's the right word. It's just not the right question to be asking. You know,
Yeah.
you think
Yeah.
of like talking with like a guru or a Zen teacher, and they'll say, that's not the right kind of question, or, you know, come back to me when you have the right kind of question. It's
Yeah.
it's just that kind of question gets you stuck,
Mhm.
basically.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So the next thing says, my favorite way to think of thought forms is that your attention and focus is a magnet, and the thought forms are made of magnetized material. We attract ways of thinking to ourselves based on what we focus on, especially if we focus on it repeatedly. This is more than just the law of attraction. This is our experience of perception. We are attracting a flow and quality of thinking based on where we bring our attention. Changing an attachment to a thought form can take effort at first, just like how it takes effort to pull a strong magnet off of metal. But that effort is only required for a short time while you are initially severing the tie to the thought form. Not going back to the thought form you separated from is a matter of continuing to be vigilant with how you engage with your mind. It should go without saying that meditation is the best practice for developing this kind of mental fortitude. So,
Definitely. And
yeah,
I've got a classic example
go
of
ahead.
exactly what you just said. So I had just completed a week-long meditation class and got home, and one of our neighbors had parked their van in front of my garage, which was very thoughtful of them. But but I'm basically shortening the story. But bottom line is, after me a few times asking him very politely, "Would you mind moving it elsewhere because I can't get in and out," sort of thing. I then came home after that meditation class had finished to find a note saying "Learn to drive" on my garage door. So, you know, you can imagine the sort of thoughts that may have been attracting at that time because of it generated anger
Mhm.
and frustration and probably many other things as well. But because I just completed that meditation, I had the presence of mind to notice that this feeling of anger it's very hard to explain, but it was as if the anger itself was coming up through my feet from the ground. That's what, that's how my consciousness translated that experience. And as soon as I became conscious of this foreign or different or extreme energy coming into my body, I immediately stopped it in its tracks just through shining the light of awareness on it. And I literally felt it draining away down my legs back into the ground. And then I just kind of hop, skip, and jumped across to the back door as if this experience had just completely left my body. There wasn't a trace of it left. So that
Mhm.
really taught me, in a very literal sense, that was for me at least on that occasion, it was a case of me tuning into that frequency, attracting a thought form of a kind, um, and then recognizing it for what it was and decide just shining the light of awareness onto it seemed to stop it from, or stop me from letting it come fully into my being. Because of course
Yes.
you take that further, and many of us, of course, myself included, in the past have we can easily become confused and think that we are the thoughts that we have.
Hmm.
But I truly don't believe that to be the case. And this example, I think, to me at least, proves that.
No, I think it's an amazing example of how disidentification could be helpful, you
Yeah,
know, because when we and how coming into the place of the observer can like disengage you from um basically spiraling or snowballing into a particular emotional direction, because um just by looking, like for an example, like a knife can't cut itself, right? So it knows. I'm trying to think. That's a particular like Buddhist like lesson that I remember from back in the day, but I can't remember the entire uh quote or anything like that. But I think what it's trying to convey is that if you're looking at it, it's not you. If you're
yeah,
able to observe it, it's not you. And so if it's not you, you can decide if you want to associate with it or not, or
yeah,
identify with it or not. And most of the time, especially with negative things that are going to interrupt our lives and make things harder or force us to repeat a lesson that we've already learned, or we feel like we understand it well enough, you know, um, yeah, it can help us, give us that opportunity, you know.
yeah.
All right, I think we're finishing up here. And I have, I guess, like a little piece that kind of ties everything together. It says, all thought forms are a reflection of the one. It doesn't serve us to be afraid of them. It's best to face them in whatever way they show up. Come to understand them and then decide if you want to engage with them. This is a foundational understanding for learning how to think for yourself, quote unquote. It is also extremely important to build a loving and trusting relationship with yourself. Because if you don't have that kind of relationship with yourself, you may find that when you go to think for yourself, you'll either not trust your own mind or you will fight yourself on everything. So, developing a good relationship with yourself is of equal priority to learning how to think for yourself in general. Um, yeah, I just wanted to add that little piece there because I think this particular topic we're going over today, obviously, is very mind based. We're talking about thought. But I think that the mind and the heart uh, go hand in hand, they work best together. So if you ever get stuck in any sort of meditative practice, or you find yourself being emotionally triggered when you're attempting to um, get through some sort of psychological blockage, it's usually because there's an aspect of the heart that needs to be taken care of. So sometimes it requires you to kind of switch tactics and focus on caring for yourself in a different kind of way. Because I find once the heart and the mind can work together on particular things, that's what really helps us move forward in terms of healing.
Yeah, beautifully said.
Yeah.
Beautifully said.
Hello, everyone, again. We were having a little bit of a technical difficulty, but we're back now. You won't be able to hear that on your end because we'll be able to edit it out, but it was interesting. Um, so yes, I was going to share that I had a visionary experience where um I really came to realize and understand just how much thought forms come into play for the transition we're going to through this into this age of Aquarius, and that all of the thought forms are kind of setting the foundation for the kind of world we're living in. Obviously, things like parallel timelines come into play as well in terms of what kind of world you're building and attracting for yourself. And I basically just started to realize, as I saw all these different kinds of thought forms coming towards me, ways of thinking that were attempting to be channeled by me or identified with by me. Um, in that moment, I realized that that's essentially what the challenge of this new age is about. It's about learning how to navigate your own mind, navigate your own thoughts, and understand that we have a choice to in what we want to play with. There's like a playful aspect of this, because you're given with an infinite buffet in front of you, and you can choose what you want to eat, or infinite amount of toys in front of you, and you can choose what you want to play with. And so the key is to understand that, like we were saying, the whole identification aspect, understanding that what's coming at you, even if it's creating an emotional response inside of you and bringing things up for you, it doesn't mean that you have to commit to it. You can give yourself time and space to think about what you're engaging with. And the reason why I think this is really important in this particular time that we're in is that this polarization of thought is being amplified. It's being, the volume is really getting turned up. And it's not to say that people shouldn't stand for something or pick things that they want to stand by, but it's important to understand that people are going to be trying to activate your emotions so that you engage with their thought structures without thinking about it, without taking the time to come to your own decision about it. So I just wanted to add that in the end here, because I feel like we're heading into such a time of thought form uh, play and engagement.
Yeah.
And so it's important for people to well, it's important to have emotional health and understand and take care of your own emotional health. But it's also super important to learn how to engage with your own mind and
Yeah.
how that works. Because if you don't understand these things, people are out there looking to take advantage of you.
And
As
this is, yeah, exactly. And what, yeah, you kind of sparked a thought in me that, we're still living in a time where people don't really fully yet have full knowing and confidence in their own self, in their own being. So they seek um, justification, they seek relevance, they seek identity through the outside, the reflection that we get by getting other people to agree to their points of view and perspectives. But I think we're moving towards a time where hopefully awareness will increase to the point where we realize that we can have our own perspectives, our own way of doing things, our own belief systems, as well as the others having their own. It's not, there aren't camps that you necessarily have to join. Um, Everyone is free to have their own perspectives and their own ways of living together in harmony. If that makes sense.
yes, yes. No, I think that's what we're trying to transition towards. It's so you guys are going to probably hear me talk about astrology quite a bit. I've been studying it for the past 15 years. So it's a way, like it's a symbolic way of thinking that I utilize a lot to try and understand like the more like metaphysical or spiritual aspects of what's happening around me. Um, but I think what you were saying is a great example of what we're trying to transition out of. It's these old paradigms, it's not just the powers that be, it's also the average person and the way that they think and engage with life. This last era that we were in really um kind of threw the baby out with the bathwater in terms of, sacrificing the ego, right? And just doing everything you can um to not glorify yourself in any sort of way. The What you wanted to glorify, what was sacred, was outside of you. That was the concept of like God and things like that. And so I think there's a long-term habit that humans have of, you know, being self-deprecating and not wanting to look inside, not wanting to engage with themselves, and looking more on at the outside for answers and solutions. And also, like you said, something to identify with, because you can't make the ego go away. You can utilize it properly, but you can't make it disappear. Otherwise, there's no, it's like the avatar that we see things through. So humans were still trying to find a way to identify themselves, to know themselves, but they were pushing that to their outside experience. And with Aquarius, it's more about, it's associated with the star card in the tarot too, which is a great example. It's this understanding of yourself, being true, being authentic to yourself, and allowing that to express in the world, because that's how you walk in a balanced way with life. Because there's this understanding, another Aquarius term, understanding of how life actually is structured, which is we are all one. And so our experience within is reflected back to us from the environment immediately around us.
Yep.
Um, so sorry, I just went on a little tangent based off of what you were talking about. But yeah, I think that's kind of what I mean by moving on from this paradigm and letting go of finding new ways of thinking, is because that's what we're being asked. It's not just about the powers that be. They're basically, they are supported by us, by our perception of reality, by our beliefs. So they crumble once we make the personal decision to start looking at life differently.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
So,
okay. I think I'm all done with my segment here. Thanks for taking that journey with me, everyone.
yeah, that was really, really interesting, Autumn. Really, really fascinating. So, let us for a moment consider thought. What is it, my friends, to take thought? Took you then thought today? What thoughts did you think today? What thoughts were part of the original thought today? And how many of your thoughts, in how many of your thoughts did the creation abide? Was love contained? And was service freely given? You're not part of a material universe. You are part of a thought. You are dancing in a ballroom in which there is no material. You are dancing thoughts. You move your body, your mind, and your spirit in somewhat eccentric patterns, for you have not completely grasped the concept that you are part of the original thought. So that's an excerpt from the Ra Contact, Teaching the Law of One, which is a channeled material from a consciousness by the name of Ra, channeled by Carla Ruckert and questioned by Don Elkins. And that was done between 1981 and 1984. And that particular quote really resonates with me, as if you really sense into those words, it opens up doors, you know?
Mhm.
So thought forms. Well, I had a look in the dictionary and was greeted by the definition, a manifestation of the consciousness or an individual or group. And the Psi Encyclopedia talks about the thought form being described as the concept of an entity created directly and exclusively by the mind, whether unconsciously or consciously, which appears to develop a life of its own. It also mentions that the belief in thought forms is the basis of several related concepts: tulpa in Tibet, puka in Germanic and Celtic cultures, and jinn in Arabic cultures. And even the character Puck in the Shakespeare, A Midsummer Night's Dream, originates from the Germanic Celtic puka. There are even reports of some Western explorers experiencing an externalized form of consciousness as a harmless being who accompanied them on their journeys. And of course, more modern day interpretations can be that of the poltergeist or demonic phenomena, which have been attributed to thought forms. So there's quite a lot of fear around what I've just been talking about, linked to the idea, especially of poltergeists. And I even had an experience myself in an old rented apartment where I was with my son one Saturday afternoon, and all of a sudden, the light shade started violently violently, violently swinging from one side to the other, and then it fell down at an angle and landed on the ground. And I can tell you that within about 5 days, I was no longer living there. But in hindsight, I've learned that really that experience was generated by myself. And earlier in this podcast, I was obviously talking about the experience I had with the guy who blocked my garage in the terms of, we have the choice. So with regards to that poltergeist, what this kind of takes me to now is the high strangeness phenomena, whilst perhaps generating some fear at the time, can be a huge catalyst for growth and integration when looked at in the future. This and other spooky experiences when I was younger really fueled my sense of curiosity and opened me up to exploring the unknown. So it's always good to revisit these experiences, as they often not what they appear to be at the time. And you can interact differently with experiences with time. I know it may sound like I'm going off a bit on a tangent, but there is reason for this. And to further add to the idea that there's often more to experiences, another example linked to the idea that I had, well, basically I had an OBE, an astral projection, where I basically moved through into a different location, and there were a couple of children, and they were playing. I suppose it would be like conkers, something like that. But the way my mind perceived it was as if the balls, the conkers were much larger and made of concrete. So there's a real weight, both literally and figuratively, to that experience. And my experience was quite heavy and a bit more negative. But I later realized the true nature of that experience and the fact that I was really viewing it through my own filters and my own belief systems and projecting my fears into that experience. And this is how I sort of dovetail it back to the idea of thought forms. They are indeed, as you said, Autumn, I think all around us, all of the time. And the key fact is how we interact with them. And what we experience is very much as a result of our own conditioning, our own belief systems, our own emotions. And I think as humanity evolves, we're recognizing that we aren't really truly defined by what we experience. It's a choice. We always can change how we see something. And as we begin to expand our consciousness and understand more about the reality, different dimensional levels of awareness, different densities, and all that sort of thing, we build very, very slowly build a more sort of detailed idea of what's truly going on, and that really everything comes from consciousness in the beginning. So it's really basically moving from the idea of there being the objective universe in which we live to, as you were saying, a very much more subjective one, which gives us the illusion of objectivity, which gives us the unique experience that we have as humans, which is the beautiful gift that we have. But it's
Mhm.
just getting to a point where we can see it in that way.
Mhm.
So where I'm coming from in this discussion today is, let's start with our most fundamental core definition of what we are. And in my mind, we're awareness, with our conscious awareness focused here in this dimension on this earth plane. And we step from moment to moment, from experience to experience, through creating the idea of time, which affords us the ability to explore ourselves from many, many different perspectives throughout our human experience. So are we our thoughts? In my opinion, absolutely not. Our thoughts are and create temporary vibrational experiences, and we basically consciously or unconsciously tune into or tune our focus onto. We fall in and out of resonance with them according to our conscious and unconscious beliefs, emotions, and choices. And they are given energy and expand if we hold on to them. If we divert our focus elsewhere, they can often typically shift in a matter of time. So thought forms are everywhere. In fact, they're the building blocks of existence, as we heard from the Ra quote. Um, and our interaction with consciousness has with them creates specific tones of experience, emotions, and manifestations. Emotions can amplify these. And if amplified exponentially, thought forms can densify to the point where they can be perceived more readily within our reality bubble.
Mhm.
So the considerations, the thoughts that I've had, having said all of that, is that they are an integral part of our experience in life. They give us the opportunity to make choices based upon our experience and preferences, and they assist in shaping and manifesting our experiences and help us to understand ourselves a great deal more. They can be consciously used to shape our experiences and reality and point towards a wisdom in getting to know ourselves more and taking more full responsibility so we can more consciously create the life we desire. And they're also a vehicle for experience that perhaps our higher selves desire to have. And that's not something we're always going to consciously be aware of day to day.
Mhm.
And this lends us to the idea that life in truth is about experiences, it's about knowing ourselves and expanding into more of the idea that we are all and all is us.
Mhm.
And that would we be wise to have more of an understanding of the subjectivity of life rather than the objectivity. Um, if we are surrounded by collective thought forms, also known as egregores, we may be unconsciously influenced. And it's important to meditate, which we discussed earlier, which really helps develop awareness of self and to expand our own consciousness. So be open to yourselves, be honest with yourselves, and allow yourself to experience the feelings that come up. Be discerning. Make choices that reflect your truth and be authentic with yourself and others. And no matter how things may seem, the truth will ultimately always, always serve you.
Yes. And I just wanted to um, expand a little bit on something that you said uh, a minute ago about how sometimes we can attract thought forms based off of what our higher self is looking to experience while we're here. And it got me thinking about how um, engaging with the idea that, or the thought form that everything you experience, good or bad, unpleasant or pleasant, is for your highest good, will change the way you experience things. I feel like it's such an essential direction to turn your attention to, because I'll just share an example where about 4 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, I got involved in a relationship. And around that time, I was trying to develop, well, I was trying to heal more, but I was also getting more into these kinds of ideas. I started listening to Bashar and this concept of understanding that everything that's happening is for your highest good came into my awareness. And I went through a difficult relationship with this person. And towards the end, it felt like trying to pull myself out of a black hole, like like the gravitational force was so intense in terms of my connection to this person that it took an immense amount of energy to get out of the relationship and move to a different location. And of course, that experience was not fun. And I had all sorts of thoughts through the experience, like, I wish I hadn't done this. Like, I'm so stupid. This was such a bad decision. Now I'm stuck and I have to deal with this. But once I finally, I continued to have faith in this idea that everything that's happening is for my highest good. And once I finally got out of the relationship and moved into a different house, I started to get to know myself again after 5 years of focusing on another person. And I came to realize that that whole experience that I had, it awakened parts of me, like strengths, and developed parts of me that I didn't even know I had. And I wouldn't be who I am. I wouldn't be able to be at the place that I am without that experience that I had with that person, even though it wasn't pleasant, you know? And I just feel like it's it's strange to have a difficult experience and then to look back with gratitude and think, wow, it really helped me further awaken to myself. It really helped me improve my relationship with myself. It really helped with all these different things. And that was not fun. That was not fun at all. It's like a very paradoxical feeling, you know? And so I just wanted to share that to like further emphasize that um, we don't always fully understand why unpleasant experiences are happening, and doesn't make them right. It doesn't make them good. And I don't think most people, most human beings from our perspective would opt into most unpleasant experiences. But from a soul level, if you engage with it and just trust the process, a lot of times you'll find you come out the other end so much more in alignment with yourself and at a place that would have been difficult to come to if you hadn't had that kind of challenge.
Yeah, from a soul level, it's the beauty of the human experience. It's the beauty of having an experience and then creating the idea of time and space to allow you yourself to explore that experience from every angle and then create your own conclusions about it and expand from that. So that is the real journey that we're on. And it's incredible when you can start to see it like that. Having gone through experiences in life, um, start to sort of see why things happen. The fact that you may be vibrating at a certain frequency, which will mean that you have thoughts that are aligned with that frequency. So oftentimes, if my recommendation to people who are going through a rough time, a rough patch at the moment, is just give yourself time and space to really experience it, to feel whatever's going through you, um, and to kind of trust that by doing that, by which I suppose can be also said to be self-care, um, you're allowing for other alternatives to come in, where different frequencies can present themselves. That, of course, takes you out of the problem. There's no sense in trying to resolve an issue on the same level that the issue exists. But if you can move yourself to a vibrational frequency a bit above it, you look down and it's no longer an issue. It's no longer a problem.
Right.
You see things so differently. So it's a game of vibration, I think. I think that can be said about life in general about
Right.
all the different facets or of source of all that is.
Right.
So yeah,
I, I, and I think that idea of like vibration, I essentially that's what you're being given the opportunity to do. Is like when you push up against something that you don't like, that you don't prefer, it's giving you an opportunity to look at yourself and say, okay, what is it within me that's getting me in the way of moving beyond this? And I think that's really the mechanism that was happening when I was in this relationship. It was years of trying to make it work. And then I got to the end and realized that the way I was feeling and the way I was thinking, even though I wanted to end things and move on, the way I was feeling and the way I was thinking was going to keep me there. So I started to have to figure that out. Like, hey, why am I thinking this way? Why am I feeling this way? What kind of thoughts and feelings would help me be more energized and more excited to do the work that's required to be able to move on to something else? And it got to a point where it was so essential because I was in such a checkmate position that I had to just go based off of I don't know if faith is the right word, but just believing and knowing that I wanted it. I was taking care of myself. I was loving myself. I was doing everything good that I could for myself and changing how I was thinking and feeling. And I just had to have faith that the opportunity would eventually come. And about 6 months of really committing to that, I had an opportunity land in my lap. And
yeah,
it's a great example of how, yeah, our feelings and ways of thinking, what we're engaging with, how we're engaging with these thoughts and these feelings is what shapes our experience.
yeah, yeah. And having trust in yourself and the universe, aka your larger self, I suppose you could say.
Mhm.
Having that trust will just bring you new opportunities, gifts, and things that you can't imagine. But when you allow yourself to shift your vibration through taking that time, then it, as I say, it opens up so many doors. So, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So, well, actually, I wanted to touch the other thing I wanted to touch on, having listened to your portion of this, was the concept of. So that's what I wanted to touch on was the concept of poltergeist experiences, because I do feel that of course everything is a thought form in one way or another, but I do think that it's our internal energy that is like affecting our environment, but it's like in a very extreme way. It's kind of like what we were just talking about in terms of changing your thought and vibrate your thought and emotional vibration in order to manifest things physically. But sometimes really intense internal stuff can um, make very um, obvious and scary kind of experiences in your environment. And I know for myself, when I was doing healing for just traumas I had gone through, that was a big thing. That was a big part of what was happening was um, having experiences of things flying off of bookshelves and picture frames flying off of walls. And I even had a friend who I had let stay with me for a while, and she was going through a hard time, and she was also experiencing things like that. So I think it can sometimes be a reflection of that internal, like, fight or strife that might be going on the inside. And funny enough, too, when they have done some studies on poltergeist activity, they find that it's most common in households with teenage girls. So if you just think of the intensity of that time in life emotionally, I think maybe emotions really play a big part of that in terms of being a strong enough energy to move thought forms around you,
Yeah.
physical ones, but yeah.
We're a lot more powerful than we realize.
Hmm. Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
very much so, I think. Um, cool. All right.
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
this has
thank
been a
you,
lot of fun
everybody.
talking about
Yeah, it
this
has. It has.
topic. Um, Thanks for getting together and talking about this with me today, James.
Yeah, thank you very much, Autumn. And I hope everyone listening in enjoyed it just as much as we did. And yeah, be sure to tune in next time.
Yes, tune in next time. Follow us on all the platforms. Do all the rating, like kind of stuff to help boost the algorithm. Thank you for your patience as we continue to kind of get our footing here on this in this podcast world and get used to this process. And we hope you all have a wonderful day.